Imagine this. You're just 21 years old, still in college. But you end up writing a thesis just 28 pages long that transforms the world of economics forever. Sounds impossible? Well, that's exactly what John Forbes Nash Jr., or J. Nash, did. With a deep love for mathematics, a sharp mind for economic theory, and a fascination with something called game theory, Nash left behind a legacy filled with brilliant insights and astonishing breakthroughs. This American genius redefined how we think about strategy and decision-making. He gave the world the Nash Equilibrium, a concept that's now a cornerstone of modern economics. In 1994, he won the Nobel Prize in economics. In 2015, he received the prestigious Abel Prize, and yes, his life was also portrayed in the award-winning film A Beautiful Mind, a movie that took home 4 Oscars. But behind all the spotlight and glory was a man tormented by schizophrenia. His journey wasn't just about complex equations and abstract theories. It was about surviving personal demons, enduring mental illness, and, ultimately, discovering a kind of love that saved him. So what turned John Nash from a mentally ill patient into one of the most influential economic thinkers of the 20th century? Let's dive deep into the extraordinary life, career, and legacy of John Nash right here on Times View. The birth of a genius, John Forbes Nash Jr. was born on June 13, 1928 in Bluefield, West Virginia. His father was an electrical engineer, and his mother was a teacher of English and Latin. Bluefield wasn't exactly a hub of academic brilliance. The town was built around coal mining and railroads, not innovation or intellectual discovery. In fact, during the Great Depression, the town suffered immensely. Coal production dropped, and fires destroyed large sections of downtown. This harsh environment forced young Nash to turn to books and knowledge from beyond his local community. As Sylvia Nasser later wrote in her biography A Beautiful Mind, Bluefield wasn't a place for scholars. Nash had to seek wisdom from the outside world. From the moment he started school, Nash stood out not in a loud or charming way, but in how he thought. By 4th grade, he was already solving math problems using methods so unconventional that his teachers assumed he was doing them wrong. His love for mathematics deepened when he stumbled across a book titled Men of Mathematics by E.T. Bell. It wasn't just a history of numbers, it was a portal into the lives of legends like Archimedes, Newton, and Gauss. Nash was captivated. And here's something mind-blowing. While still in high school, Nash managed to independently prove Fermat's little theorem, a topic usually reserved for college students, no tutors, no advanced classes, just Nash and his burning curiosity. A homegrown inventor. But Nash's talents didn't stop at numbers. He was a hands-on experimenter. He turned his room into a mini laboratory, building radio equipment, tinkering with electrical setups, and even modifying the family phone system so it would ring under unusual conditions. His love for science was matched only by his obsession with solving puzzles, math puzzles, mostly. In a personal essay written for PBS in 2002, Nash recalled, "Back then, I'd be solving math problems with far larger numbers than any of my classmates were handling. While they were playing, I was buried in equations." That kind of laser focus set him apart. But it also made him ... different, socially awkward, deeply introverted, and often lost in thought. Nash was labeled strange by his teachers. He wasn't the type to play tag or ride bikes with neighborhood kids. He was more interested in cracking mathematical theorems. Despite his odd behavior, his parents believed in him and they made a bold move. They pushed for Nash to take advanced math courses while still in high school, a decision that would ultimately change his life. From high school prodigy to college phenom. In 1945, at just 17 years old, Nash won one of the most prestigious scholarships in the country, the George Westinghouse Scholarship. It wasn't some local achievement, it was a national prize. It's given to only 10 students across the U.S. It opened the door for him to attend Carnegie Institute of Technology on a full ride. Initially, Nash pursued chemical engineering, hoping to follow in his father's footsteps. But it didn't take long before he shifted to chemistry, and then, finally, to pure mathematics. Why the switch? He realized math was where he truly belonged. It was his passion, his strength, his niche. At Carnegie, Nash quickly gained a reputation. His peers nicknamed him Young Gauss, in honor of Carl Friedrich Gauss, legendary German mathematician. And that wasn't just flattery. Nash lived up to the name. The birth of game theory obsession. While at Carnegie, Nash took a class on international economics. That course would change his life. It introduced him to game theory, an emerging field that examined how individuals and groups make decisions in competitive situations. He was hooked. This was more than math. It was strategy, psychology, logic, and economics, all rolled into one. It became the seed of an idea that would eventually grow into the Nash Equilibrium. By 1948, Nash had earned both his Bachelor-S and Master-S degrees in mathematics at just 20 years old. Around this time, he published his very first academic paper, suck and tension calculations for cable and wire spans, using catenary formulas. Yes, it sounds technical, because it was. It wasn't related to game theory, but it showcased his early ability to apply abstract math to real-world problems, something he'd continue to do for decades. The Princeton chapter universities were taking notice. Nash received offers from heavyweights like Harvard, the University of Chicago, and the University of Michigan, but it was Princeton that won him over. The chair of the math department personally offered him the John S. Kennedy Fellowship, a rare honor. Nash took it. And to give you a sense of how brilliant he was, his recommendation letter for Princeton's PhD program consisted of just one line: "This man is a genius." At Princeton, Nash became something of a legend. He was a striking figure, tall, handsome, often seen riding his bike in figure-8 loops around campus. But he was also eccentric, invented his own board game, joined student groups focused on complex strategy games, and could often be found scribbling cryptic formulas on chalkboards. He didn't socialize much. He didn't need to. His ideas spoke for him. It was during this period that he began to formalize the concept that would make him famous: the Nash Equilibrium. Cracking the code of competition, the Nash Equilibrium at Princeton, Nash dove deep into the then nascent world of game theory. But he wasn't just building on the work of others, he was reshaping the entire foundation. Before Nash, game theory was mostly focused on cooperation. The classic model, laid out in the 1944 book Theory of Games and Economic Behavior by John von Neumann and Oscar Morgenstern, assumed players could form alliances and make binding agreements. But Nash was more interested in the real world, where cooperation isn't always possible, where people act independently, selfishly, and often without communicating. So he flipped the script. Nash began studying non-cooperative games, where each participant acts in their own best interests, without coordination or collaboration. Through this lens, he developed the idea of a Nash Equilibrium, a situation in which no player can improve their outcome by changing only their own strategy, as long as everyone else keeps their strategy unchanged. Let's break that down with a simple analogy. Imagine two competing companies deciding how to price their products. If one drops its price too low, it might gain more market share but also lose profit. If both lower prices, they might cancel each other out. The Nash Equilibrium is that sweet spot. The pricing decision where neither wants to change their strategy, because any change would only make things worse for them. Nash's work was more than just theory, it was a revolution. His dissertation, Non-Cooperative Games, was only 28 pages long. But within those pages, he built the mathematical backbone for analyzing strategy in economics, biology, politics, and even artificial intelligence. And get this, he was just 21 when he submitted it. Defending the revolution in 1950, Nash defended his doctoral thesis with the same quiet confidence that defined his entire academic career. No slides, no dramatics, just him, a chalkboard, and some equations. He confidently asserted that his theory was correct, needing no edits or adjustments. And he was right. His committee was blown away. One member reportedly said, "It's short, but it's complete. There's nothing to add." What he created was just mathematically elegant. It was applicable to everything from pricing strategies to international diplomacy. Eventually, the entire world would catch up with what Nash had discovered. Game theory in action, you might be thinking, okay, but how does this apply to real life? Well, game theory, and especially Nash Equilibrium, explains a lot of human behavior. Let's explore a few classic examples. Business competition. Two companies fighting for market share might be tempted to lower their prices. But if both do it, profits shrink. If one does and the other doesn't, the one that drops prices gains customers but sacrifices revenue. So both companies eventually find a balance and equilibrium where they don't dare change strategy. It's the prisoner's dilemma. This is one of the most famous examples in game theory. Two suspects are arrested and interrogated separately. Each has two choices: stay silent or betray the other. If both stay silent, minor sentences. If one betrays and the other doesn't, the betrayer walks free, the other gets a heavy sentence. If both betray, both get moderate sentences. The Nash Equilibrium. Both betray, because neither wants to be the sucker who stayed silent while the other walked free. Global politics, from nuclear arms races to trade wars, nations constantly find themselves in strategic standoffs. Understanding the Nash Equilibrium helps explain why countries often act the way they do, trying to optimize outcomes based on what they believe their rivals will do. Biology and AI, even in nature, game theory pops up. Animals compete for resources, and their survival strategies can be explained through Nash's work. In AI, algorithms use game theory to negotiate, optimize, and adapt. So yeah, this nerdy math thing from a 21-year-old Princeton student, it became a blueprint for the modern world. Genius, but different back on campus. Nash was something of a mystery. Brilliant but odd. He was handsome and had the charm of a leading man, but he avoided parties and small talk. He once rode his bicycle in figure-8 patterns around the quad for no apparent reason. He would leave cryptic math problems on hallway blackboards, hoping someone would try to solve them. Some classmates admired him. Others thought he was weird. Most agreed he was a genius. One of his fellow students, Lloyd Shapley, who would also become a renowned game theorist, once said, "Nash was hard to get along with, but his logic was razor sharp." Nash was also fiercely independent. He didn't want to co-author papers. He didn't like to follow the crowd. He trusted his instincts always. And that independent streak was both a strength and, as we'll see later, a burden. A love story begins in the mid-1950s. While teaching at MIT, Nash met Alicia Lard, a physics student from El Salvador. Out of a class of hundreds, only 16 were women, and Alicia stood out. She was smart, confident, and immediately drawn to Nash. Years later, she recalled, "I walked into class and saw him. He was handsome like the golden boy of the mathematics department." Nash, usually aloof, was intrigued by her intelligence and grace. They began dating, and by 1957, they were married. They had a quiet ceremony at a local Episcopal church, even though Nash was an atheist. A year later, they had a son, John Charles Martin Nash. To the outside world, things looked perfect. Nash had a brilliant career, a beautiful wife, and a growing family. But inside his mind, a storm was brewing. Cracks in the mind. By the late 1950s, Nash began to show signs of severe mental illness. He became paranoid. He believed that he was receiving encrypted messages from aliens and foreign governments. He thought he was part of a secret diplomatic mission, began writing letters to embassies in Washington, claiming he had discovered messages from extraterrestrials. In one disturbing episode, Nash arrived at a New Year's Eve party wearing only a bedsheet, convinced he was on a cosmic mission. His lectures, once brilliant, became incoherent. At Columbia University, he attempted to deliver a presentation on an unsolved mathematical problem, but instead rambled about conspiracy theories and irrelevant theorems. The audience sat in stunned silence. That lecture marked the beginning of a long, painful chapter in Nash's life, a mind at war. By early 1959, Alicia, now pregnant with their second child, knew something was terribly wrong. Despite her fears, she tried to protect Nash's reputation. Eventually, she made a heartbreaking decision. She had him committed to McLean Hospital, a psychiatric facility near Boston. There, Nash was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. He underwent insulin shock therapy, a brutal treatment that involved inducing comas with large doses of insulin. It was controversial, dangerous, and ultimately ineffective in his case. In his own words, Nash said, "I moved from thinking in a scientific way to thinking in a delusional way. I believed I was the most important person in the world, so that even the Pope was out to stop me." It was a terrifying descent into darkness. The long descent, and the woman who stayed after his first hospitalization in 1959. John Nash resigned from MIT. His academic career, once soaring, came to a halt. He spiraled further, traveled to Europe, seeking asylum in France and Germany. Believing he was being persecuted in the U.S., he wanted to renounce his American citizenship, convinced that he was being followed and watched. It was a time of deep paranoia and emotional chaos. Back in the States, Alicia gave birth to their son. Despite the stress and heartbreak, she never abandoned him. When Nash's condition worsened abroad, she flew to Europe, leaving her newborn son with her mother just to bring him home safely. It wasn't the last time she would rescue him. When they returned, Nash was institutionalized multiple times in New Jersey, always involuntarily. He'd argue with doctors, claim he wasn't sick, and quote obscure legal arguments to try to secure his release. His behavior was erratic. And yet through it all, Alicia stayed. She housed him, protected him. Even after they divorced in 1963, she let him live with her and their son. She became his caregiver, financially, emotionally, and mentally. As one of her friends put it, she wanted to protect his mind, because that mind was extraordinary. History proved her right. Her unwavering belief in Nash gave him the stability he needed to survive. Ghost. A ghost among scholars in the 1960s and 70s, Nash became a haunting figure on the Princeton campus. Students called him the Phantom of Fine Hall. He'd wander the math department corridors, unshaven, muttering to himself, scribbling complex formulas on chalkboards, lost in his own world. Some laughed, others avoided him. But a few knew who he really was. A once brilliant mind now battling invisible enemies. Nash was no longer teaching. He wasn't publishing papers. His illness still gripped him. But Alicia, despite all odds, never turned him away. They were divorced. But she fed him, sheltered him, raised their son while juggling medical bills. She bore the burden of his care, even when it meant sacrificing her own peace. In his Nobel autobiography years later, Nash would write, "I do not wish to describe this period in detail. It is too personal, too painful. But out of that long tunnel came light." Recovery, the slow return of John Nash sometime in the late 1970s. Something shifted. Nash, without medication, began to will himself back. Not overnight, not completely, but piece by piece. He started recognizing the delusions for what they were. Instead of believing the voices or coded messages, he began questioning them. He slowly retrained his mind to filter reality from fantasy. In his own words, "I simply decided to stop believing in the ideas that were irrational." It was a gradual process, not a sudden one. From that point on, he was never hospitalized again. He refused antipsychotic medication, instead relying on logic to guide him back to reality. In the 1980s, Nash began re-engaging with the academic world. He started emailing mathematicians, attending seminars. Slowly, people began to notice. The genius was still there. It wasn't exactly the triumphant return of a hero, but it was real, quiet, earned, and deeply human. Nobel Prize. Redemption at last in 1994. The phone rang at Alicia's house. It was the Royal Swedish Academy. John Nash had just won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, alongside Reinhard Selten and John Harsanyi. The reason? His groundbreaking work on non-cooperative games, his Nash Equilibrium, had become essential to economics. Nash, once dismissed as a ghost, was now a laureate. At the Nobel ceremony, he stood before the world clean-shaven, composed. Humblin thanked the people who never gave up on him, especially Alicia. It was more than just an award. It was vindication, a full-circle moment where science, love, and perseverance collided. As in his speech, Nash said, "I've made the most important discovery of my career, the rediscovery of my reason." A Beautiful Mind, indeed, in 1998. Sylvia Nasser published A Beautiful Mind, a biography that chronicled Nash's turbulent life. The book won the National Book Critics Circle Award and was adapted into a film in 2001. Directed by Ron Howard and starring Russell Crowe, the movie was a massive success, winning 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Though the film dramatized parts of Nash's life, it captured the emotional core of his journey, a battle with schizophrenia, the power of love, and the brilliance of a man who refused to be defined by his illness. It brought Nash's story to millions, and inspired countless people struggling with mental health, creativity, or self-worth. legacy that shaped the world. The Nash Equilibrium is now taught in every economics class. But its reach goes way beyond that. In politics, it shapes international negotiations and peace talks. In biology, it explains animal behavior and evolutionary strategies. In computer science, it powers AI algorithms and network optimizations. In business, it helps companies forecast market behavior and strategic choices. Nash's work gave us a new lens to understand how people and systems make decisions. Perhaps more importantly, his life taught us something deeper: that genius doesn't protect you from suffering, that mental illness doesn't erase brilliance, and that love steady, patient, and fierce can be the force that brings someone back from the brink. The final chapter. In 2015, Nash received the Nobel Prize, one of the highest honors in mathematics, for his work on partial differential equations. He was 86. That same year, just days after returning from the award ceremony in Norway, tragedy struck. On May 23, 2015, John and Alicia Nash were killed in a car accident on the New Jersey Turnpike. Their taxi driver lost control. They weren't wearing seatbelts. And just like that, two lives that had endured so much ended together. But in a strange and poetic way, maybe that's how it was meant to be. Together. Always. Even in death. The torch he left behind until the very end, Nash was still working with young mathematicians, writing papers, discussing open problems. Even at 86, his mind hadn't stopped. His passion for learning, his commitment to abstract beauty, and his resilience made him not just a genius, but a symbol of hope. Nash once said, "In madness, I thought I was the most important person in the world. But in sanity, I realized the truth. No one is truly alone, as long as someone believes in them." That's the real lesson of John Nash's story. It's not just equations or theorems, but this: even in darkness, the mind can heal. Even in chaos, reason can return. And even when the world gives up on you, one person's love can make all the difference. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply made you think, give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Times View for more powerful stories of brilliance, struggle, and redemption. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.